Welcome back to the Student Hub Live. This session is called Study Like an Athlete, like a world-class athlete, if we have that. We know that world-class athletes spend an awful lot of time to ensure that their training, nutrition and performance preparations are all in line to make sure that they have the most effective performance on the day. So in this session, we have members from the sport and fitness team, and we're going to provide you with some help pre, post and during studies to boost academic performance. So this sounds like an absolutely wonderful idea. Ben, Simon and Simon, why did we choose this analogy, and why is it so important to tell students of the whole school about studying like an athlete?
Well, when you're an athlete, the benefits you get from your training session depends upon how you're feeling whenever you go into the training session, and that in turn depends on your nutrition before the training session. So you should be going in feeling energized and ready to study. Often we get to our study at the end of the day and we just feel like we want to go to sleep, or we don't really fancy it, but we should feel really up for it, really ready, and that depends an awful lot on what we eat before. It also will depend on how we recover afterwards. So the recovery strategies or nutritional strategies after will influence how well you recover, so that next time you come to the session, to your study session, you know, you're feeling again energized and ready to go.
Well, this is another barrier in the students' study plan of being agile and on the move, etc. Are you saying we've got to prepare and eat well before we can do anything then?
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah,
okay.
I think we are. I mean, personally, we've all found that by getting exercise, eating properly, and recovering properly, you get a lot more out of your work, a lot more out of your studies.
Because it's difficult, as you say, to do things if you're feeling tired. It's the end of the day,
Yeah.
etc. And a lot of the things that I guess we do know from athletes is that they will put time in the diary to make sure that this can happen.
Exactly.
You know, so that it is possible to be able to eat at certain times, to study at certain times, and to do certain things without having to think, oh well, I can't go studying or doing this because I've had this, that or the other. So
Yeah.
this fueling at the beginning of this sort of process, which foods have we got then that are going to link to that, and what sorts of things should students be eating before they start studying?
So we'll just show you a little bit about some of the background to choosing foods and why we select certain foods and why athletes select certain foods as well. So there's something called the glycemic index. And over here we've got the scale of 0 to 100, and with 100 on the scale being pure glucose. And we've got different categories. So we've got low GI foods, we've got medium GI foods and high GI foods. And these different categories will actually affect our performance in terms of both in sport but also when we're studying as well. So on these lines over here we can see that this is the blood glucose levels, and you can see that the high GI foods give us a really big spike in sugar levels. And whilst we might feel great at the top here, you know, we might have increased focus, concentration, we might even feel a little bit jittery, we do then end up with this big crash. And so whilst we may be performing well with our studying up here, down here we're going to feel lethargic, we're going to feel irritable.
And this is on a scale of an hour, so we're talking quite short periods of time for that spike to happen, because we've got 1 to 2 hours on the total axis.
Yeah, so it can happen very quickly, and also with the medium and the low GI foods, this is where we're going to get that slower release of energy. And this is where we're going to have foods that are going to complement our study, help us to perform well. Same with athletes. So when we're doing sport over a prolonged period of time, and we need to concentrate and focus on different performances, we need to fuel the body with the right things. And these ones are the ones that allow the energy to be released over a much longer period of time, and not fluctuate in mood, not fluctuate in sort of concentration levels and focus.
Excellent. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about those foods and things because we're looking, like you said, a short period of time. But Simon, I wonder if we can talk also about not only the foods that you eat, but the mental attitude, because we've heard from colleagues earlier that part of it is obviously physiological, but part of it is psychological. And many athletes will have a goal or a task that they're going to do within that training session. So that's all going to feed into this preparatory phase.
I think it does. I mean, we're very careful with our students, and they've got their weekly planner. They know what's coming up to study for that week, and they've probably worked out how much time they've got as well. So it is very good if you can have just short-term goals. So tonight I'm going to make sure I've done this, this and this. And so that just keeps you focused, keeps you motivated for that session.
Excellent. So we've spoken a little bit about the foods. I think everyone wants to know what some of those foods are and what you'd recommend eating before studying. And then I'd also like to talk to you, Simon, about exercise, because that's another important part of the whole equation, isn't it? So, Ben.
Yeah, so on the table we've got a whole array of foods here. So over on this side we've got things like the sugar-coated flakes, without naming any brands. So although some of those can be portrayed as a healthy cereal, they're actually very high in terms of GI. So having a breakfast like that is going to increase your blood sugar levels, and then you're going to get that crash. And therefore, you're going to feel hungry after about an hour again. So you're going to want to eat more food and replenish the glucose within your brain as you're concentrating. So something like the porridge is low GI. That's going to give you that sustained release of energy. And that would be sort of the breakfast type things. There's also, at the front there, we've got things like tuna, baked beans, whole grain bread. So those are all low GI foods that you could combine. So beans on toast, sprinkling of cheese on. Nice little meal to help with your studying. We've got eggs in there as well, so any dairy products are all low GI. And then it's just thinking about when you're eating, how it's affecting your blood sugar levels and how it's going to affect your study performance.
Okay, so avoid the sugary things and really go for things that are going to give you some sustenance over time.
Yeah,
and they're very quick and easy to do as well. I mean, that's not difficult, making some beans on toast or
beans
some
on toast.
omelette.
It's not going to eat into your study time.
No. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say as well, I mean, for example, the rice is sort of moderate to high.
Yeah.
And you look at the rice and you look at the oats and you think, well, what's the difference?
Yeah.
And the real difference is the rice is refined. It's meant to be brown. It's had like the fibre and some nutrients taken out. And that speeds up the glycemic index.
Right.
So anything that's lost its fibre is going to be higher. So things with fibre in them, like the oats, is going to be lower. But also, if a food's got high protein or high fat, it will be lower in the glycemic scale as well. So, for example, if you've got, say you had white bread and you wanted to lower the glycemic index, if you put butter and cheese on it, like cheese on toast, then that would lower the glycemic index. So there's lots of factors that affect it.
Yeah.
So it's almost about thinking about the choices you're making. If you want eggs on toast or whatever, one is better than the other.
Yeah, and it's the combinations, like Simon's just said. So, for example, a jacket potato is really high on the glycemic index. But if you add in the tuna and some cheese, or if you add in beans and cheese, then that brings the overall meal GI down, and therefore you get that sustained release of energy.
Okay. Excellent. Now, one of the things, Simon, I wanted to ask you about is exercise, because this can be a real release. And we were talking earlier about how exercise can both cause and be a cause of stress, but can also release stress as well. How does exercise play a part in people's study routines?
Well, I think exercise, there's two elements. One is kind of the chronic regular exercise. So if you're a regular exerciser, what effect does that have on the brain? And then there's also, what about if you're going to study now and you've just done some exercise, so that acute effect. So the regular exercise is really good. Research has shown that the more you exercise and the more you keep that up regularly, then the more or increased attention, focus, your memory, your retention of information, all of these things that the brain is responsible for are increased through regular exercise. And it's very similar if in the acute scenario. So if you do an acute bout of exercise, And the research is varied at the minute. So some suggest to do high intensity for short duration. Some suggest doing a long duration of exercise, but at a lower intensity. But all of them seem to have a positive effect on the brain for increasing that cognitive control, that memory, that retention, but also that ability to plan and focus on a particular element, which is definitely needed within the study.
John wants porridge with beans on toast and cheese on top right now. Okay, you can have some food and have a break, John, by all means. I'm quite hungry looking at all of this also. Some of our students, though, have very interesting sporting pursuits at the moment,
Okay.
not always very accessible to do just before you're studying. What would people doing things like windsurfing and various sorts of things?
Windsurfing and skiing and mountain biking and a bit of everything.
Yeah.
Paragliding.
Not something you can do in the morning. Jiu-jitsu, all sorts of activities. Now, bearing in mind that a lot of people want to study often and do their 8 hours or whatever a week, how might they use exercise then if perhaps they aren't an athlete?
Well, again, even using any of those activities, if you've done an activity, then you have a window, depending on the level of activity that you're doing, but you have a window of anything from a couple of minutes all the way through, sometimes to 48 hours of where you have this increased attention. I would imagine that a lot of people have kind of felt similar. So whether they've gone through a working day, they feel very tired, and then they have to sit down and start doing some study. So if they incorporate some activity, even if it's a walk or just kind of moving through the motions as you're sat in a chair, so moving your arms up and down, just increasing the movement that your body is doing, then we're starting to increase that activity, and we're going to have some rollover effect into our study. So it's about trying to get away from that sedentary activity and inputting something or some movement in between or before the study activity. Some researchers even looked at exercising while studying. So the researchers looked at things like treadmills with laptops on, or even bikes with laptops on. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that every student go out and buy a treadmill that they can put their laptop on, but it works on a similar idea that if you just move your arms or you move your legs whilst you're sat down, or you get up and do a 5 to 10 minute break in between the study elements, then you're creating that exercise and you're creating that movement to link to those cognitive benefits.
I love that idea, because 5 minutes you can do something, and I mean there are all sorts of apps that give you a really good little workout in 5 minutes. I mean you can actually do quite a lot if you put your mind to it. There's no reason why you couldn't just do something in your lounge at home, do a little abs workout or something, or lift a few tins of baked beans if you wanted to sort of just do something to get active.
I think that what you talk about, that buffer effect, where you've been at work all day, you come home and you're tired. If you do half an hour's exercise, suddenly you feel relaxed, you've got rid of your stress, you feel more energised, and you feel ready to go again. And that's how I've always used it, actually.
And a lot of people enjoy walking the dog.
Absolutely.
So doing something just to get out of the house is a very good thing. Not that dog, that's rubbish.
Very therapeutic.
Resistance training.
Yeah, exactly. HJ is very excited. HJ, I see you found a new unit.
I know, I heard there's a unit called Eating to Win.
Oh, yes.
As soon as I mentioned that, Mandy ran to her book just to have a look, but it's not quite as we expected.
Shame.
It sounds like a bit like a competition, but apparently it's really interesting. It builds on what you've been saying about glycemic indexes and
That's a big
planning
focus
meals
of
and
it,
things like that, yeah.
Now I can see most TMAs are due at noon, but there's a 12-hour grace period. So I can see there might be certain times when students may want to reach for those cornflakes or something that's going to really give them a boost. Are there times when people might want to use sugary snacks to their advantage if they need a big boost in performance during study?
Ooh, good question.
If they're poor on time planning, of course. You know?
Yeah, if we look at this this tray here in front of us, so we've got probably the snacks that people would reach for, so biscuits, probably the most common one. But again, they're high GI, so if it's coming into the last hour before the deadline, then maybe you might want that sugar spike just to get your focus and concentration, energy up. We've got an energy drink on there as well, which links into the caffeine effect. However, if you've got lots of TMAs and lots of assessments over the course of your qualification, then eating lots and lots of biscuits is going to have some sort of long-term health implications. So we have got other snacks available. So we've got some dried fruit down here. We've got nuts and seeds. So again, those are low GI, great little snacks that you can just be
so
grazing
the fruit is low GI and the nuts?
Fruit is low GI.
And the watermelon?
The watermelon is high GI.
Really?
Yeah. So,
why?
Just being in terms of the response that the body has when you're ingesting it and digesting it, it has an increased blood sugar level associated with it, but you'd have to eat a lot for it to really affect your blood sugar levels.
And is that an unusual fruit then? Are most fruits low?
Yeah, so most fruits are low. The banana is an interesting one as well. So if you eat it in the state that it is there, so slightly green, then it's very low GI. But the more yellow and brown it starts to become, the higher the sugar effect on the bloodstream. So again, just sort of bearing in mind that it can sneak into the medium category. But again, that's fine for sort of studying.
Okay. Now, what about good old coffee?
Okay, so coffee, I think, Simon, you were going to mention about
so I've
caffeine.
got a nice kind of infographic to show you here. Caffeine, similar to kind of what you said, is kind of the one we kind of tend to reach for when we need that extra little bit of energy. Now, the main thing to think about is what happens after you finish your studying or further on. So this is a good picture here that kind of shows that if we have a regular coffee or a regular caffeine drink at about 5 o'clock, then how long is it before that caffeine is released from the body? So this image here shows you what's called the caffeine half-life. So as we start down here, so if we have a coffee at 5 o'clock, then it takes roughly about somewhere between 30 and 75 minutes for the peak of the caffeine to be within our blood. Now, that's great. So we're going to feel very energized after 30 to 75 minutes, somewhere between there. And it depends on if you're a regular coffee drinker or if you're the amount of exercise you do. There's lots of different things that affect whether you will respond in 30 minutes or respond in 75. The thing to kind of just to remember is kind of further down. So the half-life, which is when there's half of that caffeine left in your body, will happen somewhere between 3 to 7 hours later. So if you have that coffee at 5 o'clock, then you've still got half of the caffeine left in your body at either 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, depending on where you respond. But some people who are slow responders might still have half of that caffeine left in their body at 12 o'clock at midnight. So although you've done well, you've got very excited and you're nice and alert, ready for the study, you then can't sleep. So it's then that inability to recover. And that's just if you have one coffee. I'm sure many of us out there will have one coffee at 5 o'clock and then we think we might need a little bit more at 7 o'clock. And then these levels just keep getting higher and higher, which means that it's going to affect our sleep and our recovery as we go further.
Okay. So something to bear in mind there, but we do always like to reach the end of our study. So let's end by talking about what we can have after we've done our study. And I see we've got some lovely wine and crisps and chocolate. And I'm pleased you're advocating a treat because I think it's a marvellous idea.
Yeah, so it's definitely worth treating yourself afterwards. So we have got milk chocolate, we've got dark chocolate. If you're going to reach
Which one should you go for then?
If you're going to reach for the chocolate, a few squares of the dark chocolate would be the better choice. They are both low GI, but the sort of health implications, it would be better to
Is there much
reach for
in
the
it?
dark. There's more fats and a bit more sugar in the milk chocolate,
Okay.
so definitely better to reach for the dark
And what
chocolate.
about the crisps? If you could choose the chocolate or the crisps? I mean, the wine's just a dead cert.
So it depends on what time of day it is. So if you're going to start eating those high GI foods, so like the crisps, just before you're going to go to bed, you're going to get that sugar rush just as you're trying to drop off to sleep. So again, treat yourself, but bear in mind that it might have implications on either your study or your sleep.
Okay, and we've talked again, I mean, I guess sort of bringing this back to sports science, about the recovery from the trauma of the activities. So treating yourself, but also, you know, being kind to yourself and not setting yourself up with too many falls, so not having the coffee too late at night, etc., and doing things in moderation so that you can recover, because this is an endurance thing, you know, for a lot of our students, this is the start of many years of study, and you have to be in it for the long term.
Yeah. Yeah, so the sleep is really important in terms of the recovery. So making sure that you get enough sleep so that you're prepared for if you've got to study again the next day on the run up to a deadline, so that you can actually perform well and you can focus. So around the sleep, it's making sure that you think about something called the circadian cycle, which is 90-minute blocks of sleep. So we go through the phases of light sleep into deep sleep and then back into light sleep again. And if your alarm's going off halfway through one of those 90-minute cycles, you're going to wake up feeling groggy, not wanting to get out of bed. So I know you can't just switch off your mind and say, right, I'm now asleep and I'm going to plan my sleep around those 90-minute cycles. But it's just factoring in getting to bed early enough so that you can get the required amount of sleep.
Well, it's clear that sports science has a lot to do with studying. I imagine all your students, having learned all about this in a lot more detail, are absolutely fine.
We hope so.
Yes, is the resounding reply.
Yeah.
We hope they learn everything from it. But a lot of it is trial and error, and whilst there is some science behind it, again, it's about figuring out how a lot of this works with your body, with your cycle, and with your situation whenever you can study.
Yeah, making sure that you're not too strict on yourself and, you know, do treat yourself.
And the odd treat every now and then. Brilliant. Well, Simon and Ben, thank you so much for coming along. It's been a really interesting session. I hope you've enjoyed that at home. We're going to have a short break now and look at another one of our student videos where we have Olivier Mallet, and then we're going to take a look at postgraduate study with Jane and Alison. So we'll be back in 5 minutes for that next session. See you then.